We were playing a Guns N' Roses song while you guys were getting set up. I remember you guys had a whole thing with them, right? James, right? You hated those guys. You went on tour with them, and it was just a nightmare.
They were always late. That's why I hated them.
Was that the reason?
I think they pretty much stood for everything we didn't like. The glam, the LA, the everything we kind of escaped.
Metallica, the unchallenged giants of heavy metal. For more than 4 decades, they've ruled the stage, sold over 163 million albums globally, and codified thrash for generations. But there's a catch. Not all bands have shared the stage with them. Offstage from the blockbuster tours and mythical performances are tales of rejection, feuds, and plain old mismatches. Today, we're breaking down the top 10 bands Metallica refused to tour with and why. From punk icons to glam giants and even bitter rivals, some of these reasons will shock you. Stick around, this list is wild. Number 10. Slipknot. Few bands in the modern era embody chaos, intensity, and theatrical aggression quite like Slipknot. Since their self-titled debut in 1999, they've been one of the most explosive live acts in the world. 9 masked members tearing across the stage, pounding on drums, climbing scaffolding, and unleashing songs like Wait and Bleed and Duality. With Metallica being the biggest metal band on the planet, you'd think a joint tour between the two would be a no-brainer. But here's the twist, it's never happened. So why not? The reason is one of pure intensity, control, and ego. First, the live concert contrast. Slipknot gigs are sheer pandemonium, intentionally crazy, chaotic, and intended to assault the senses. Pyro, jumpsuits, masks, and 9 musicians making a whirlwind of noise and energy. Metallica's gigs, though still furious, are the opposite, tightly constructed, disciplined, and precise. Their objective is to give a tight, professional show. A tour together would have been a battle of philosophies, Metallica's clinical precision against Slipknot's aggressive anarchy. And then there's the demographics. Slipknot's crowd leans younger and lives for extremity. Mosh pits, walls of death, and perpetual bloodbath are par for the course in their shows. Metallica's crowd, although still aggressive for heavy music, cuts across generations, from old thrashers to parents taking their children. Blending those fan bases might have been explosive, with each side calling for intensity and the other legacy-minded anthems, such as Nothing Else Matters. There is headliner pride to consider, not that anyone should necessarily care. Both bands are headliner material, Slipknot and Metallica. Neither would open for the other, and that raises even more problematic questions. Who closes, who has a longer set, and who actually attracts the most people? Actually, for Metallica, good guardians of their number 1 spot, the idea of sharing that limelight with Slipknot was just too dicey. It shouldn't be mentioned that there are bad vibes here. Actually, Slipknot vocalist Corey Taylor has praised Metallica numerous times as one of his greatest influences. However, even Taylor admitted in an interview back in 2019 that the two bands are worlds apart in terms of how they go about performing live. The Metallica-Slipknot tour would still be one of the best what-ifs of the contemporary metal. No doubt, it would have been epic, tossing huge tempers around a venue mildly. But one of the choices Metallica made was to tour with safer acts, Pantera or Five Finger Death Punch, as far from untouchable sludge terror that simply couldn't offer the band anything it really desired. Metallica would have made wild risks under acceptance. Therefore, so-called Dream never went beyond the drawing board. If you thought that was crazy, wait till you see who's up next. Number 9. Creed. Now, you can criticize them all you want, but Creed were massive at their best. Their album Human Clay shifted more than 20 million copies globally, featuring radio-decimating tracks such as Higher and With Arms Wide Open. By the time their second album, Weathered, released, they were topping arenas and festivals and were fast becoming one of America's biggest bands. So why did Metallica never tour with Creed? It's really a matter of musical philosophy, image, and fan miscue. Let's begin with the music itself. Creed heavily featured soaring, emotionally charged ballads, spiritual themes, and Scott Stapp's over-the-top vocal approach. Their music was frequently read as Christian-influenced anthems, though the band wasn't formally promoted that way. Metallica by contrast, founded its reputation on brutality, introspection, and a bleaker Weltanschauung. Together, they would have sounded like a clash of tone. One band urging people to stretch for the light, the other venturing into the darkness of human conflict. Then came the issue of credibility image. During the mid to late 90s, Metallica were trying new things with their sound and came out with Load in 96 and Reload in 97, which were relatively cool but not overly warm reactions. They shaved their heads, changed the logo, and ventured deeper into alternative-sounding music. Metallica was in deeper trouble at this point for challenging their credibility, and fans were insisting that they had softened. Given that Creed is a band that was too commercial and regularly derided by critics and metalheads alike, Metallica did not necessarily need this ironic tour. There was once a time when Lars Ulrich himself disparaged bands that compromised their image for radio playability. To Metallica, Creed likely represented just the sort of safe, mainstream rock that they were so desperately trying to get away from. And say a word about fans. Creed's fan base was radio-oriented, younger, and inclined towards casual rock listeners. Metallica were die-hard to the core, metal fans who survived by circle pits and headbanging. Combining the two would have been eye-opening. Do you think Creed fans would have half-heartedly swayed to with arms wide open before Metallica descended upon them with battery? Not going to happen. Metallica opted instead for tour companions who could maintain their heavy credibility. Corrosion of Conformity, perhaps Pantera. Creed simply would not be on board with the aesthetic, despite their chart success. There was little open feud, little in public trash talk, just a deliberate, mindful selection. Metallica would save face without suffering what could have easily been one of the most ill-matched tours of the decade. Number 8, The Offspring. On paper, a tour of them with Metallica in the mid-1990s sounds like a recipe for success, but it never materialized, and why tells us a great deal about where Metallica's mind was during the decade. Let's go back to the mid-90s after Metallica had recently experienced the huge success of the Black Album, with Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters pushing them beyond thrash into outright mainstream rock superstardom. They were selling out stadiums, evolving their sound, and making a pitch to tens of millions of new fans who had never held a Slayer or Exodus album in their hands. At the same time, The Offspring were surfing on their breakthrough album Smash, an album that was returning punk rock to the mainstream with such hits as Come Out and Play and Self-Esteem. They weren't a cult band anymore. They were spearheading a full-blown punk revival. Both acts were huge, but in very different ways. So why didn't it occur? Metallica's camp had rejected an offer to tour with them at that time, and it was all because, you guessed it, of musical direction. Metallica was actually leaning towards a heavier, more serious image then. Their image was constructed around monumental riffs, doomy lyrics, and a reputation for being uncompromising. The Offspring, by contrast, were tongue-in-cheek and sarcastic in their direction of music with tunes such as Pretty Fly for a White Guy, later on only turning up that fun image. Obviously, drummer Lars Ulrich considered the Offspring's skate punk energy slightly incompatible with the Metallica image. Can you picture Metallica fans showing up for a night of crushing heaviness only to find Dexter Holland making jokes between high-speed punk anthems? It would have been like oil and water. Then there were practical factors. By the mid-90s, Metallica was filling up football stadiums, while the Offspring, though quite successful, were still largely headlining theater and arena shows. The whole logistics of angling them into an opening spot might have seemed wrong. And then, let's be realistic, Metallica people in the pit at the time would have devoured the Offspring. It wasn't, though, a personal issue. Dexter Holland would go on to say that he appreciated the choice. No hard feelings, no theatrics, just different universes. But fans are curious to know what they would have witnessed of a crossover tour by Metallica and the Offspring, a bridge of generations from thrash to punk, or a half-appreciating crowd and half-lynch-mobbing crowd. Whatever, what a fascinating what-if of the golden era of 90s rock. Number 7, Limp Bizkit. Love them or loathe them, you can't help but agree that they were in Normo at their height, with Fred Durst prancing about in his red Yankees baseball cap and tracksuits as the band assisted in shaping the nu metal explosion, along with Korn, Linkin Park, and Slipknot. Singles such as Break Stuff, Rollin', and Nookie weren't merely hits. They were anthems for an entire generation of disgruntled teenagers. So here's the big question. Why did Metallica, one of the world's biggest live draws, ever hit the road with Limp Bizkit during that nu metal boom? After all, both bands were dominating MTV, radio, and festival lineups, and on paper you'd think the crossover could have been huge. The answer boils down to three main factors: image, fans, and reliability. First off, image. Metallica's brand has been based on grit, musicianship, and honesty from the very start, and even when they veered into mainstream arenas on Load and Reload, there was still a sense of gravity around them. Limp Bizkit, on the other hand, went full-on theatrical, attitudinal, and frat boy posturing that shouted spectacle rather than substance. In an interview in 2003, James Hetfield criticized some of the nu metal bands, asserting that they were more concerned with shock value than art. Though he did not mention Limp Bizkit explicitly, it wasn't difficult to put two and two together. And then there's the fan base problem. Metallica's fan base is passionately committed and defiant, and does not want the rap-rock crossover yelps of Limp Bizkit fans. More significantly, during the Saint Anger era, Metallica were receiving so much negative attention from the fans that they'd be taking a risk not to offend die-hard fans with a spot on the same bill as Limp Bizkit. I have no idea how the hardcore thrashers would feel standing in front of the pit, just having to listen to Rollin'. No chance. And finally, it was all that bit about reliability. Limp Bizkit, following Woodstock 99, came to be associated with mayhem. Their own legacy, one containing an air of riots and bombs, so promoters and band alike started to wriggle at finding themselves aligned with them. Metallica, newly returned from the impressive but most ambitious S&M symphony endeavor, wouldn't risk sullying their name over a co-headlining show with a media-talking, irresponsible band. A Limp Bizkit Metallica co-headlining affair might have been one, but it never came to pass. In fact, good, likely. Metallica is attempting now to seriously get back together, while Fred Durst et al. Just edge further into nu metal controversy. Alternate universes, alternate roads, and Metallica not obviously interested in the carry-on. Number 6, Nickelback. Okay, let's get straight to it. Nickelback were a massive deal in the early 2000s. Their album Silver Side Up was released in 2001, and presto, How You Remind Me was everywhere. Radio, MTV, jukeboxes at clubs, you couldn't get away from it. Nickelback were among the best-selling rock bands of the decade. So, if they were that big, why didn't Metallica ever bring them along for a tour? The answer is all about image, credibility, and fan expectations. For starters, Metallica has always seen itself as the people's band, and even at their most experimental, they've positioned themselves as authentic, uncompromising, and rooted in the raw energy of metal. Nickelback, however, gained a reputation, deservedly or undeservedly, as corporate rock. Their music was slick, radio-friendly, and mass-marketed, and to hard rock enthusiasts, Nickelback represented everything Metallica had struggled against during the early days. Entering into business with them would have been the complete wrong signal. Firstly, timing was critical. At the beginning of the 2000s, Metallica had already been criticized for the Saint Anger album, with the fans discussing its unpolished and raw sound, the lack of guitar solos, and its tough tone. The critics were also not gentle, and Metallica didn't need more fuel from their critics. Therefore, collaborating with a band such as Nickelback would inevitably be perceived as the ultimate sellout act. Think about the headlines here. Metallica goes soft with Nickelback. Not a good one, for sure. There's also some discrepancy in the live show. Metallica comes loaded with its performances, circle pits, headbanging, and raw catharsis, whereas Nickelback, conversely, had a huge following for its performances, circle sing-alongs, and radio rock anthems. It's not that Nickelback wouldn't have put on a truly awesome